It's finally time to wrap up our look at the Gravity Falls Lost Legends comic with the final story out of the 4. The Pine Boys in, the Jersey Devils in the details. A story about young Stan and young Ford, which is something that I certainly didn't expect when I first picked this comic up. And as we're about to discuss, that's not entirely a good thing. After a brief introductory scene which gives us a quick refresher on the dynamic between these characters when they were at this age, we are treated with another brief scene which serves to remind us that their parents are pretty frickin' terrible. Their father's, and I quote, swankiest gold chain has gone missing from their crappy little shop, and all evidence points to it having been stolen, and so he just assumes that Stan did it. But this story takes place back when these two characters still supported each other, so Ford refuses to believe that. Their dad wants to ground Stan for the rest of the summer, so Ford sticks his neck out, claiming that he and Stan can find who really stole the gold chain, and if they do, neither one of them will get grounded, but if they don't, they both will. So they set upon solving this mystery, opposed by the Sibling brothers, a pair of really, really terrible characters who are a clear parody of something like the Hardy Boys. These two are the premier mystery-solving twins in town, and apparently solving mysteries in this town, this little New Jersey town, is big enough business that they can actually be that, but not such big business that they can't afford to have some competition, because they are very opposed to the Stan brothers robbing them of any of their mystery-solving opportunities. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about these characters until I start wrapping up the review, because I hated them that much and thought that they were that unnecessary for this story. Using this story's version of the Journals, a magazine about paranormal creatures that can supposedly be found in the New Jersey area, Ford deduces that the Jersey Devil might have taken the chain, and there's even footprints outside that look like the Jersey Devil's footprints. And we'll talk about this later a little bit. Point is, they have a lead, as absurd as it is, though perhaps it's not absurd in this world, and they follow it, and this is when they bump into the Sibling twins. They're faced with other obstacles as well. First of all, Stan is known throughout town as a juvenile delinquent, and people don't want to help him, and their eventual only lead ends up being a sort of house of freaks. I don't like using that term, but that's essentially what it is, a house of freaks, which they kind of imply is like a permanent circus that sits on the Jersey coast, and I'm sorry, that's just goofy to me. But the quote-unquote freaks at this quote-unquote freak show serve as another obstacle for them to overcome. They don't like normies. But Ford, despite the fact that he's very insecure at this stage in his life about his extra finger, shows it off to these people, showing that he is not entirely normal himself and building a kinship with them. And they end up giving the boys the next clue that they need to find the creature's den. They solve a puzzle involving the town lighthouse, and they're in. They're in the creature's den. Finally, they can get the chain back and maybe even prove that this cryptid actually exists. It is a win-win situation, but you can kind of see that Stan feels guilty about something, and it's not hard to piece together what that might be. And so, especially after Stan confesses to Ford that he feels like he's a screw-up who their dad is never going to like, and Ford reminds him that he is a good person, he's a good kid, as Ford says. He finally confesses that he did take the chain, but it wasn't for any nefarious reason. He was going to take it out of its case so that he could polish it for their dad as a kind gesture, and ended up breaking the case by mistake, making it look like a robbery. He panicked and ran off with the chain. In short, this entire adventure was completely unnecessary. This is when it's confirmed 100% that the Jersey Devil is actually real. This is actually its den, and it chases them out of the den and along the pier. It seems like they're about to be eaten by it, but this is when the Sibling brothers actually reappear in the story in a way that is necessary for the plot to get to where it needs to go. Because, fun fact, I skipped 2 more appearances by them that were entirely unnecessary to the story. First, to get into the lighthouse, Stan and Ford had to dress like the Sibling twins, using their own clothes to get by the lighthouse keeper who didn't trust Stan, which is something that wasn't necessary. The lighthouse keeper didn't need to be a character in the story. And then later, in the creature's den, just before Stan very likely would have confessed about the chain himself, the Sibling twins show up again with photos proving that Stan stole it. Again, this is just as Stan seemed ready to confess, so not only did their appearance take away from that moment, not only did it rob him of that moment to prove that he is a good person, but it was entirely unnecessary to the plot. Here, though, they finally leave an impact on the story, netting the creature, and then using it as leverage to negotiate with Ford. he took the pictures away from them, the pictures that prove that Stan is guilty. They want the pictures back, I guess, so they can get Stan grounded and prevent these two from solving mysteries that the sibling brothers could have solved themselves for the rest of the summer. And they offer to let Ford keep the creature and prove its existence to the world, making himself famous, and allowing him to live out one of his dreams of making a major scientific discovery if he gives them the photos back. But he chooses to side with his brother using Chekhov's possum to free the creature, leaving the siblings without any leverage, and then, for good measure, the freaks chase the siblings down and presumably beat them to death. At least, that's my hope, because like I said, I really do not like these characters. Even this climax, with a little rejiggering, they could have found some way to make it so that Ford stood with Stan without this specific event happening. I just don't know why these characters are here. I don't know why they bothered to write in an homage to characters like the Hardy Boys. Great characters. Fantastic, classic characters. And then turn them into villains who weren't even all that necessary to move the plot forward. I don't know why this couldn't have just been a story about Stan and Ford and the dynamic between them. I also don't get why they basically turned the Jersey Devil into a dragon. Like, I can find some versions of the myth which kind of read as dragony, but most of them don't at all. It's just super weird. Like, right down to it breathing fire and hoarding valuables in its cave. It's a dragon. The only things Jersey Devilish about it are the fact that it has a goat-like face and goat hooves on its feet. And honestly, I just think that's kind of a bummer. There's also a scene at the end right before he grounds them where their dad seems to be kind of warming up to the boys, and we know that that's not really a thing that ever actually happens. He never actually warms up to them. I mean, I guess he kind of warms up to Ford, but it's for entirely the wrong reasons. Like, their dad is horrible. I don't know why they even bothered writing in a scene where he seems more sympathetic. In fact, at the end of the day, that's what my feelings towards this story really boil down to. I don't know why this story exists. Like, it was cool to see this dynamic between these two characters, especially right after Don't Dimension It, where Mabel convinces them to start supporting each other again. But no matter how supportive they are of each other at this stage in their lives, we know they're still going to go through all the crap that they went through in Tale of Two Stands, where they had a falling out and then didn't speak until Ford came back through that dimensional thingy. This doesn't do anything to change our perception of the characters as they are now, and that's a huge misstep. If we were going to get another flashback of these characters as kids, it should have somehow informed their characterization now, and this just doesn't. Like, at best, maybe it implies how they might interact now that they're being more supportive of each other in the present. But we don't know that for sure, and I much rather would have seen that in a story set in the present. Like, there are a couple pages at the end of this story which hint at the adventures that they go on after the events of the show proper. I would have liked to have seen that. Maybe some very simplistic adventures of present-day Stan and Ford interspersed with flashbacks of this event, sans the siblings, who, like I said, basically were just padding in this story. It's also kind of weird to me that this was structured so much like an episode of Gravity Falls. Like any other story, save for one about the young Stans, I can understand why it would be structured like an episode of Gravity Falls, because that's the point. But the life of young Stan and young Ford isn't a Gravity Falls episode. As far as we know, they didn't go on paranormal adventures like this. Like, maybe there's some stuff in ancillary works that I just haven't read yet, like I still haven't read the journal, for example, that explains that they used to go on paranormal adventures like this, but as far as I know, that was never a thing. They just had normal lives, and their first experiences with the paranormal occurred in Gravity Falls. Like, it's kind of cool to know that cryptids do exist in this universe in places other than Gravity Falls. Like, we'd already gotten hints of that with, like, the weird spider lady in the one episode, but it's cool to see some corroboration of that in this story. But that doesn't make this episode worthwhile in my eyes. I still would have liked to have seen a story about present-day Stan and Ford. Maybe they take the Stan of War II back to Jersey and encounter the Jersey Devil. You still could have done the Jersey Devil thing. It didn't have to be set in the past in this story that just is questionable in terms of its continuity and canonicity with the show. This is the only story in this comic that really doesn't feel like it should be canon, and that hurts my enjoyment of it quite a bit. That's not to say that I hated everything about this story, though. I did like some stuff in this story. I liked seeing these characters so supportive of each other, recognizing each other's insecurities, and helping them to deal with them a little bit better. The dynamic between the two characters in this story was good, and if this had been an episode, part of the hypothetical third season of the show that I've been talking about throughout all these reviews, maybe an episode which directly followed Don't I Mention It, with Mabel's suggestion that the two stands start supporting each other better again, leading into more episodes showing them growing into more supportive roles in the present. I think this could have been a really great episode, up there with Tale of Two Stands in terms of their development. But standing alone in a void, it's not enough to fill that void. Structurally, it's a good story. In terms of the character dynamics in this one story, it's a good story. The humor even landed pretty well, despite the fact that I think it had some of the weakest humor of the 4 stories in this book. Actually, that pretty much describes my feeling towards it. I feel like it's not bad, but it's still the weakest of the 4 stories in this book. And some of the nitpicks that I have about it detract from my enjoyment of it. I do like the end, though, the end bookend with Schmebulok, which is not just the end bookend for this story, but the end bookend for this entire book. All throughout, all of the bookends featuring Schmebulok throughout this entire book, he's kind of been skirting the line between being a mouthpiece for the fandom and a mouthpiece for Alex Hirsch himself, and at the end he just kind of drops all pretenses and starts speaking as Alex Hirsch, going off about how much he wants a 3rd season and basically just asking for one from whoever can give him one. I think that's super interesting. Like, it was a funny little breakdown in the life of this writer and showrunner, but it's also pretty interesting in that Alex Hirsch just forged a new relationship with Netflix. Now, based on the limited descriptions of the projects that he's going to be working on that we have so far, none of them are a revival of Gravity Falls, but if he builds up enough clout with the people at Netflix, it's possible that he might be able to, through them, acquire the rights to make more Gravity Falls and then revive it on Netflix in the future. It is technically possible, and I'm honestly kind of secretly hoping that that's what happens. So reading this right now, as I have that secret hope in the back of my head, one that I'm sure a lot of you guys share, was pretty interesting to me. Overall, I feel like the Lost Legends book was pretty great. There were definitely aspects of it that were weaker than others, but I had so much fun revisiting this world. The only real legitimate problem that I have with the story is that after having read it, I just want more. I want more of this show, more of this universe, so much more than I did before I picked this book up. But that's a good thing. That's honestly the greatest endorsement for this book that I can give you. If you have not read Lost Legends yet, you are doing yourself a disservice. Pick up a copy. It's good. It's really good. You will not regret it, especially if you are a huge fan of this show like I am. All of that said, though, guys, what do you think of the Jersey Devils in details, or Lost Legends as a whole, if you have read them? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below, or over my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.